When I was 9, I used to work for a grocery store in Central Falls. I'd walk for hours, distributing pamphlets door to door. With hand-me-down oversized sneakers, I walked and jogged for miles to deliver those papers. Now, I wake up every morning, ritualistically tying the laces on the same size sneakers that I've finally grown into, and I run. I run on the still crumbling streets that I once covered as a boy, passing across city bridges and lines, into the well-paved paths of neighboring communities. There's a moment, as you're running, when your heart begins to pace so quickly that you wonder whether the next beat might be its last. Do you stop? Do you quit? Do you keep going? That's the breaking point, and every morning I cross it. I push beyond it. With each stride, I dream and wonder what progress might look like for my daughter and the many generations that will follow. My name is Luis Daniel Munoz. I'm a medical doctor, organizer, husband, and father, and I am running for governor of Rhode Island. I was born to Puerto Rican parents, and as one of 5 children raised by a single mother, the path was not paved for someone like me to run for this office. But things haven't changed for working families who are still struggling to survive. I'm running because we can't afford to wait another day for political courage. I'm running because it's time to declare that a child's fate should not be based on a lottery system, a person's health should not be based on their zip code, and no parent should have to decide between feeding their children or paying their rent. What we need in Rhode Island is a commitment to environmental justice, an increase in affordable and low-income housing, a free and accessible community health system with fair and equitable health insurance options, and an education system that makes greater investments in our youth and their future. The power of the people has always been greater than the people in power. It's time to unite and to demand better. As a kid, I worked for change. As a doctor, I worked for hope. And as governor of Rhode Island, I'll work for progress.
Good evening. It is Tuesday evening, and you're joining us back here on Pump Up the Volume. And as you can see, I am running for governor. My name is Luis Daniel Munoz. I'm a medical doctor. I'm also previously gubernatorial candidate in the state of Rhode Island, currently running as a Democrat in order to really transform the system as we know it in Rhode Island in a way that amplifies not only the voices of communities as we're doing on this show, but really creates a pathway by which those communities can inform the decisions made at the state level, whether it be the allocation of money resources and where those money resources should go to build up our local economies, or ultimately, where the policy should lean towards to ensure that every person in this state that resides in this state has an opportunity that is on a trajectory towards better economically, educationally, and of course, just basically better in terms of the quality of life that we all have. I'm joined here today with my fellow co-host, Mr. Pat Ford. Pat happens to be the co-founder of the Libertarian Party here in the state of Rhode Island, and we have had some very interesting discussions or debates in the past, which again have been edifying to the people that listen. And my fellow co-host, Mr. Scott Rotundo, who has been very involved in Rhode Island politics for a long time, and also is known in the independent media airways as one of the independent journalists on WBOB 990. So here we are. It is the first show after my announcement, and I was, really hoping to kind of open the floor to maybe questions from Scott and Pat. I'd love to answer any that you may have, or you think the listeners might have. That's okay.
Yeah, let me go first. It was a surprise to some in the chattering classes that you decided to run as a Democrat, and I was wondering, if you can, let's talk about your motivations for running as a Democrat. In your past election, you ran as an independent. You made a principled stand then. You're making clearly a principled stand now. But what were the underpinnings of that?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Pat. It's interesting, right? Because in 2018, when I ran as an independent, it was pretty clear to me at the time that something had to change. And the question is, what is the pathway towards that change? How do we effectively transform a system? And what's interesting about running as an independent in Rhode Island is, you know, you really have to share what your values are, where you stand on every single issue. The challenge becomes time. Do you have the time to address every single issue and inform enough Rhode Islanders so that they can be empowered to know that there is an option that embodies the values that they believe, but still is not going to submit to the litmus test, right? Or the groupthink that exists in party systems here in the state of Rhode Island. And I'm saying all of that, Pat, to say that my values, based on the lived experience I have growing up in Central Falls, becoming a medical doctor, and dedicating myself to community advocacy, have always aligned with what might be perceived, at least, as the purest form of the Democratic Party, which we know in Rhode Island does not exist in its purest form. But that pure form is really an idea that people will not be left behind, that we will make investments in the people in the state of Rhode Island, help build them up so that they can build the economies. But again, Pat, we've had discussions time and time again about the extent of cronyism in the state of Rhode Island, nepotism. And so after following 2018, it wasn't very clear that I was going to run again. And frankly, my commitment when COVID happened in 2020 was just to help. And as I was helping, as I was doing the work with contact tracing and vaccination systems, I had the privilege of being on the Governor's Equity Council. Not necessarily a governor that I believed had a lens of equity in terms of how they maneuver through this crisis. But it allowed me to really quantify that. It wasn't just an assumption anymore of how Rhode Island politics operated. It was really seeing what the lack of attention resulted in terms of loss of life and harm to historically disenfranchised communities. And it wasn't until the end of 2020 that it became clear to me, in terms of the most clarity I've ever had in my life, that the only way to transform a system isn't creating an alternative structure that has the same hierarchical framework that oppresses the voices of communities, but instead to really challenge the foundation of the Democratic Party here in the state of Rhode Island in a way, and with the intention to transform it towards more of what it should be. A party that actually fights for the working class, a party that lifts up historically disenfranchised communities and makes investments in people. So while that is a long answer, that is the reason I'm running in the Democratic Party. It is not a difference, in the past, there was never a difference of value systems. There was just a difference at that time in my mind of what does transformation, what does change look like? And for me today, it's clear that it looks like this: going right at the establishment that has perpetuated a system that doesn't work for Rhode Islanders, but doing so in a way where we can mobilize communities, community leaders, and change the party to one that's more reflective of the diverse communities of Rhode Island and more reflective of the diverse perspectives that we have on this call and throughout the municipalities.
Scott, what are your thoughts?
All right, so Dr. Munoz, first of all, congratulations on running again.
Thank you.
It's no secret to anybody here or any of my friends. You obviously have my full support. Very much looking forward to what you'll be able to do once you attain office. My question is this: so I already know the reasons why you're going to get my vote in the Democratic primary. For listeners out there who are looking at a field where you have Governor McKee, probably Treasurer Magaziner, Secretary of State Gorbea, Jorge Elorza, and whomever else. I already know why you're different than those candidates, but maybe you could take some time just to tell people what makes you different from the other candidates in the field.
Right. Thanks, Scott. So there's a lot. I mean, I think fundamentally it starts with lived experience. We can all ask ourselves, what is it about the struggles in our lives that inform the values we have and what we fight for? And I think for everyone, the first answer, at least, is simple. It's family. Here in Rhode Island, we have a strong grasp of what it means to embrace family, whether it's blood or people that you grew up with and they become your family. But the second the kind of second side to that answer, or the second element of that, is really, what else are you going to fight for that somehow, in one way, shape, or form, you experience in your life? Like, why do people fight to lessen the taxes that they're experiencing, if not to avoid a level of poverty that they've experienced? And in my life in particular, not only did I experience poverty, but hunger, but a home environment that didn't have a father in it all the time. And so when I look at issues and challenges throughout the state of Rhode Island, from those that children experience to those that adults and working families experience, for me, it is very personal. And it's not just empathy that I feel, it is a rehashing of the things that I've lived. And I believe that what we need in Rhode Island is a governor that has that level of connection, intimate connection with what that struggle is. Because what drives me, what pushes me to engage in the policy fights that are needed, and the discussions and fights that are needed for the allocation of resources, like we've done over the past 2 weeks with mass vaccination, is that lived experience. And when I look at the other potential and current, the current governor and other potential gubernatorial candidates, it's clear that that lived experience is not the same. And the only comparable one would be Jorge Lorzo, who unfortunately has demonstrated over time that for some reason or other, there's an inconsistency in how he grew up versus who he advocates for. When I say who, it is for working families. It is for historically disenfranchised communities. It is frankly for the 90% of people in Rhode Island that are consistently left behind when decisions are made. Decisions like giving large companies tax breaks, or developers for luxury housing the opportunities, whereas our people, the people that are working, the laborers, are ultimately left at the mercy of those outside forces and special interests. So what differentiates me, to summarize everything I've said there, Scott, is I believe in people and investing in people and making sure that we're fighting for a working class and not playing the same crony politics that the Rhode Island establishment has played in the past. I will not submit to litmus tests. I will not submit to a level of groupthink. What I will commit to, though, is developing a pathway and a process that pulls communities, both leaders, organizations, and just community members throughout the state into the discussions that are being had that will ultimately influence their lives and the lives of their children.
Talk to us about what happened this past weekend. What forces brought people together, sometimes clearly by sheer will, the reactions of different aspects of the community that we call Rhode Island at large, and how they challenged you.
Yeah. So we're talking about the mass vaccination site, right?
Right.
Pat, just want to be very specific. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. You do the work time and time again. And when I say do the work, and even in healthcare, whatever role you play in healthcare, whether it's the medical doctor, whether it's the technology person, or the administrator of a clinical operation, you see so much suffering that over time, even though that suffering brought you to that profession to help address it, you find that it becomes the norm to experience it. And while you're intellectually being empathetic, rarely does your heart feel the same weight that it initially felt when you first saw someone suffer. And I'm being really philosophical here because there was an experience that I underwent 3 weeks ago. It was really interesting. We were in an equity council call, and there was a senator that was speaking about an undocumented family that had gone to a clinic in a municipality, these municipal clinics that the governor says are going to work and they're going to solve everyone's problem. And they were undocumented. And this family was turned away. So a family that is already cast into the shadows, that resides in a city that has a prison that imprisons undocumented families, now turns a family away from getting a vaccine because they don't have an ID or utility bill. And the level of emotion I experienced at that point was just overwhelming. And it really gets to a breaking point. And we have to ask ourselves when we get to those breaking points, will it break me or will we do something? And I decided to do something. There is no reason in the state of Rhode Island, with so many establishment politicians talking about the need to make voting easier and to not require IDs and all of this rhetoric around other policy issues, somehow turn away and not acknowledge that there was an undocumented family that could not get a life-saving vaccine because they did not have an ID or a utility bill. And I told the council that day and all of the state members on the council that I was going to do something about it. And within 7 days, in collaboration with Pastor Howard Jenkins, in collaboration with Black Lives Matter's Political Action Committee, with Direct Action for Rights and Equality, with Providence Youth Student Movement, with the Mount Hope Community Center, and other leaders, we came together to call out this administration for the significant equity gap in vaccine allocation that was ultimately pushing communities. I say pushing because the economy began to open, pushing communities towards the probability that they would suffer more and possibly see more in the way of fatalities. And the administration reacted to that because that's Rhode Island politics. People have to make noise in order to be treated like humans. How is that okay? Why do people have to yell and scream and cry for someone to hear them? And so we moved, they reacted.
Okay. At all.
I mean, it's what was fascinating to me was I actually saw, and these were tiny amounts of backlash because, and there's so much irony in this. There are those people who'd assumed that there was privilege in the notion that challenged communities were actually getting vaccinated, and that the fact that the vaccination call sought to target those communities not because of privilege, but simply the inability to have reached them in the past because of constraints placed on first responders and supporters by the Rhode Island government. I just fascinated by your reaction to that.
Can you repeat that, Pat?
Sure. There were those people out there, and it was small, but it was telling, that were critical of your efforts, not you personally, but of the overall efforts of the coalition that you built, because they assumed that there was privilege in the fact that a community that had been left behind so often in terms of health care during this crisis were suddenly getting attention paid to them. They were suddenly getting, for lack of a better term, their due. They were suddenly getting the resources that they've been starving for and crying for the last few months. What's your reaction to people who, out of nowhere, find privilege in a marginalized community? I found that baffling.
Yeah, my reaction is let's make it clear what we're talking about here before I give my reaction. We're talking about a difference between equality and equity.
Right.
And so here's the difference. Equality. One person gets 2 apples, the other person gets 2 apples. Everybody gets 2 apples. We know that's never been the case in Rhode Island. Doesn't matter if you're from West Warwick, if you're from South County, right? That's never been the truth here in Rhode Island. But when we talk about equity, we're talking about something different too, right? We're saying if someone's about to die for lack of food, who is more likely to die within the next hour? And maybe they should have the apple first. That's equity. It's considering the risk, considering the outcome, and trying our best to protect the most vulnerable by dedicating our resources for a specific time frame to those that are more likely to suffer within that time frame, more so than others. That's equity. And so anyone that's opposed to that time frame of having dedicated more vaccines to vulnerable communities, Vulnerable meaning they are 3 times more likely to be hospitalized. Their death rates are 7 times greater than others who are white in their age group, and comparable death rates to those that are between the ages of 74 and 84 that are white. Okay, so vulnerable communities. If you have concerns with that time frame, I would ask anyone listening, did you have concerns within a week and a half prior to this weekend when 18,000 teachers were given vaccines, who demographically we know are not necessarily the most diverse group of professionals in the state of Rhode Island? So we can talk about equality in Rhode Island. We need more of it. 100% we need more equality. But when we're talking about life or death, who gets the apple to not die of starvation? When we're talking about that level of equity in this crisis of COVID-19, I have no regrets and I will stand on this hill that we did the right thing and that we are going to continue to do the right thing. And as much as I'm a part of the efforts that are leading, and whether that's now or even as governor of Rhode Island. And it's not just me, though. It's not just me. This weekend, I just want to say, Pat, I gave you an answer that was very much coming from my perspective, but this could not have happened. This could not have happened. I want to elevate some names here without Kia Bryant, Direct Action of Rights and Equality, without Shonda Womack from Arise, without Helen Dukes from Mount Hope Community Center. Too often we leave names out, and political leaders in Rhode Island, I think, get so wrapped up in themselves that when they finally get into office, they fail to bring in all other ideas. And I won't be one of those governors. We need everyone at the table.
Excellent. No, that's great.
And that answer, again, that kind of encapsulates, I think, why you need to run and why you are running, because so many of the boilerplate politicians, I'll call them, they look at these communities and they see votes. They see votes to be harvested, right? And you see human beings. I struggle to think of how anybody else in the Democrat field would be able to look at folks, who like just about everybody on this call have at one point or another had to worry about how they're going to pay their rent. Can they pay their rent and buy groceries? Can they pay their rent and buy groceries and get, clothes for the kids or books that they need for school? None of the other candidates in the field have had to deal with that like the three of us have. And I think, again, that's another reason why, why you definitely have my vote. And that's why, it's so important that we have one of us running for governor is what I'll say.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And like you said, Scott, really, it's one of us. I mean, the amount of divisiveness, it's interesting in Rhode Island politics because you have this everyone claims to be a moderate. Everyone, like, we want to bring everyone to the table. But that level of moderate really just is equal to inaction in Rhode Island. Like, what are the steps that are being taken to actually advocate for 80% of Rhode Islanders that do not find themselves on any spectrum, whether it's an economic one, whether it's a political one? Like, what does it mean to move forward? And I had this question earlier today, which is, why are progressives working with you? And I find it interesting when someone asked me that, because first off, we're getting people vaccinated so that they can live. We're getting Southeast Asian communities like Cambodians, Laotians, Hmong, that are not only ignored, but literally no communication materials are created for them to understand how to navigate this system. And we're getting them vaccinated. And Senator Tiara Mack, yes, Representative Lonella Felix, yes, again, Black Lives Matter Political Action Committee. These organizations and leaders are mobilizing all of their resources to help with this. But what is that, right? What is that? The question was, well, aren't they part of like some progressive faction? No, these are people doing the work. These are people fighting for people. We see a top-down approach on the far right and on the far left. What I mean by that is we see people push ideas on communities and call it progress. But what is real progress? Because if you push something on a vulnerable community and that system fails them, you have left them worse off than they were before. And what I mean by that, rather than talking in platitudes here, is something as simple as healthcare. We talk about what it means to have accessible, affordable healthcare. And we hear ideas about Rhode Island having a single payer system that essentially is, a funding mechanism that can somehow ensure that funds aren't siphoned off by corporations that are in between the insurers and patients. But if you are attempting to transform an entire system and you can't even invest in free clinics for people to walk to, or address the fact that Blue Cross Blue Shield, the very company that's about to send bills to people who had COVID-19, is lobbying for policies to make it harder for urgent care, affordable centers to be here in Rhode Island. If we can't address that, then is it real progress? And these are the questions that we need to ask, that I will be asking on this campaign. But the answers are also simple. They're bold, but they are simple. And so, Scott, I think it's about time that Rhode Islanders, we all get comfortable with the word progress and know that actually doing the work, that real progress, not platitudes or pushing down of ideas on vulnerable communities, but real progress, the one we all fight for every day, the one we talk about on this show, it is feasible. And we can do it together.
So what type of campaign do you envision during this sort of challenging COVID period that we still find ourselves in? As an aside, I do a national show for a national political organization that I'm a member of, and I talk to candidates every week from around the country. And obviously there's, different logistics involved. There's different state rules. There's different levels of, if you will, infection and outbreak at different states. There's different communities within different states. And that's really reflective of Rhode Island. I mean, if you look around this 44-mile tall state, it's astonishing how many different Rhode Islands there are from everything, from economy to logistics to geography to the people. How aggressive are you going to be campaigning?
Aggressive. I mean, I guess aggressive is it's an interesting word, Pat.
Our conversations are nothing if not interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I am campaigning. And in terms of aggression, while I won't apply that to myself because I'm sure that some would like to, would love to say that that I'm being aggressive in my approach. I would say we're being sophisticated. We're creating a grassroots movement in Rhode Island that no one has done. People have thrown money at organizations and bought votes. That we know happens in Rhode Island. But what we've demonstrated in short order within the last week and a half is that we could mobilize over 60 leaders and over 25 organizations across the state to save 2,660 lives. It's that level of mobilization and that level of sophistication in how we move that's going to lead to a path in this campaign that's going to lead to a victory, not just a victory for me, but a victory for Rhode Islanders. And my quote unquote aggression is not aggression. It's a love and a passion for Rhode Islanders that I'm going to express with each word I say and with each stance that we collectively take.
Outstanding.
It's interesting, though, that people would use the word aggression because that obviously, when you first hear the word, it has negative connotations, but that people would use that. You know what I mean? It's just to get a part of that, like, kind of subtle mind game.
It is, and I think we have to be really careful how we frame words. And this campaign has to, when I say this campaign, I mean, look, I have to be accountable for the words that I say. And I also, every word that I say is what I believe. It is what I believe. And this is why I don't, can't fit me into a box. You will not have a litmus test in front of me. At the end of the day, we need leadership that is willing to speak truth and also be receptive to others' truth. And so, I'm saying all this to say that when we use words, we have to also acknowledge the history behind words, because there's also truth there. So why do we talk about race? When the fact is, race was created, race used to mean kin, and then they found that they could use the word through the Enlightenment to actually separate people based on physical characteristics, because it was essentially helpful to a version of capitalism then to have people at the lower end of the totem pole and those at the top, and to essentially rationalize the abuse that was taking place. So these are racialized communities that we have in Rhode Island. But yet when you acknowledge that they've been racialized, you can then get to the core of what that struggle is. What is the intersecting point of our struggle? Because if we can understand that, then we know how to move together and to move forward towards progress. And so we have to use words carefully. And, this has been something that I've learned from organizers and leaders throughout the state of Rhode Island. And so when I say sophistication, when I use that word sophistication for this race, it's one where we are able to acknowledge our history, acknowledge the shortcomings, but still see that intersecting point where we can all move together. And that's not philosophical. That is fact. That is fact. And we've seen that over the last week and a half. And I could not have foreseen this happening in terms of the amount of leaders coming together. I couldn't have predicted it, but it's happening. And I just feel privileged to be a part of it. And I'm going to continue to fight for all Rhode Islanders.
It's interesting because as someone who is a grassroots Democrat in this race, many would point out the, if you will, the fact that establishment connections aren't necessarily involved right now in your campaign. But proof positive of the effectiveness of your campaign was the ability to be a leader in this movement last weekend. And so while other candidates will obsess over whether or not they're going to get the party line endorsement, the coalition that you helped build for this past weekend was stunning. It really represented virtually every aspect virtually of the grassroots progressive movement that is looking to work within disenfranchised communities. I mean, virtually every aspect of it. So that won't qualify for some of the aged, the quote unquote Democratic with a capital D party. Your coalition really represents the future of the Democratic Party, doesn't it?
The future of the Democratic Party should be one of inclusion. It should be one of equity, and it should be one of diversity. And we have to hold that word true in terms of diversity, not just diversity in terms of, again, communities that have been racialized, but also diversity in ideas and thoughts. It's interesting that politicians always like to, when I say politicians and I say always like, let's be clear, people that run within the Democratic Party oftentimes talk about bases in the context of race or racialized communities. And who will be the base? And are you splitting that base of a racialized community? And I don't think that way. My base is a mindset. And that mindset is prevalent in the state of Rhode Island. It is a mindset that is sick of what is going on for years. It's a mindset that is ready to mobilize and move differently. And it is a mindset that covers a very large political spectrum. And so what I'm hoping to demonstrate not only over the next few weeks and what I've hoped to demonstrate over the last few weeks, but also for the continuation of this race, is that for people who are solution oriented, for people who want to raise up vulnerable communities, but also create a path towards economic opportunity and to create sustainable systems that do not suffer under the abuse of cronyism or greedy corporations. For people who have that mindset, they have a candidate now that they can vote for, and a candidate that's going to be on the ground doing the work with them, standing beside them the whole way through.
And I think it's really a wonderful thing. And as you said, bringing the diversity, you know, different mindsets, different lived experiences into the Democratic Party. It's funny because, you know, they claim to be the big tent party, but as you mentioned, Dr. Munoz, we really haven't seen that, you know, in Rhode Island. It kind of reminds me, tongue in cheek, of something that happened to me 25 years ago. I was a student at the University of Maine, and I was invited to participate in a diversity roundtable, right? In like 1995. So everybody's around the table. There were students, there were professors, there were student athletes, there were, you know, people that worked at the university. And I remember one of the professors, a professor, mind you, saying, "I don't think we need a diversity committee here. We don't need this roundtable. We have a very diverse campus." And I swear I can't make this up. People from all over Maine come here. And I feel like that's kind of what we have in the Democratic Party in Rhode Island right now. You know, just this kind of groupthink that, as you said, you're kind of helping to kind of, you know, throw the shackles off of that. And again, I think that's just one of the multitude of reasons why, you know, you're the candidate in this race right now.
Are you?
I really appreciate those words.
Are you going to be looking to debate other candidates in the near future?
Once they announce, I'm prepared to debate anyone. Again, you know, I said this earlier, and I can't shake the words of Robert Kennedy. And I've really never been that type of person, right? To just have to put a quote out there. I feel comfortable in expressing myself, but I can't shake Robert Kennedy's words when he says, "Progress is a nice word, but change is its motivator, and change has its enemies." And in those words are embodied like just a host of emotions that have kept me up on many nights, and in a lot of ways just kept the path ahead so clear for me, which it's really not about whether someone's wearing a cloak that's blue or red. It's about who's in the way of progress, and how do we mobilize in a sophisticated way a grassroots movement that can pave a path forward, push them out of the way, move them out of the way, whatever metaphor you want to use, but they need to get out of the way. And they need to make way for Rhode Islanders, for micro businesses in this state that need capital, for, again, families that need affordable health care, for children that need a good education, not to close the doors to the paths that exist for charter school, but to open alternative doors for those students that are struggling in traditional public school systems, so that while we address the antiquated education formula that exists today, we can also provide them with a path towards vocational training and after school programs that are housed in universities like Brown University that don't pay taxes, but really should start sharing their infrastructure with us. And also in our own public university and colleges, so that ultimately every student in the state, independent of where they're going to school, will have a place where they can come together, fill the gaps that exist, and start to build a legacy in Rhode Island, a legacy that keeps them here. So my friends, I'm so grateful for giving me space to address these questions. And you know, again, it's very clear for anyone looking at the show that we have these discussions all the time. Sometimes we have heated discussions, and they're always great and entertaining. But the questions you presented today have helped me likely address questions that people have, and my hope is that they can have more clarity as to the why, the what, and the how. And this is just the beginning. Not only the beginning of the discussions we're going to have on this show, but the beginning of a race that's going to take a while. So in this time, anyone listening, I would say, please go to www.luisdaniel Munoz.com, just like you see it spelled out, LuisDanielMunoz.com, and you will find the latest articles on the news. You will find the latest videos, as well as information with my stances on issues like some of those I've described today. And for anything you haven't heard, just know that more is coming. And again, guys, Pat and Scott, I just want to thank you so much for giving me space to share. And I know you're both going to get pushy next week, so we'll wait till then.
No, I'm thrilled that when you in the year 2021 that there is a forum for an effective grassroots leader to, on a weekly basis, take on the issues in as public a manner as he chooses, with as much information as you want to deliver, unbound, if you will, by the conventional politics of the last however many years. I'm thrilled that that's going to happen. I think it will radically alter the chemistry, the direction, the content, and ultimately the results of the campaign.
Thank you. Well, this is, like I said, the beginning. The movement begins, and for anyone listening, just know it's a movement of people. It's people-powered progress, and we can do it here in Rhode Island. We've been waiting, and now's the time. If it's not 2021 after COVID-19, then when? We can do it. We need to do it. So reach out, join us, and join us back here on Pump Up the Volume, where we amplify the voices of communities, and we'll be back next Tuesday evening. So thank you again, and have a great evening.